Welcome to a space where love isn't loud, it's deep, where friendship slowly blooms into something undeniable. Here, every story is wrapped in silence, stolen glances, and touches that speak louder than words. These aren't just love stories, they're awakenings of the soul, of the body, of everything once held back. If you've ever loved someone in quiet, if you've ever felt seen without needing to be explained, if you've ever had a night that changed everything without a single promise made, you're home. This channel brings you raw, tender, and emotionally powerful love stories, told from the inside out, where intimacy is sacred, where connection goes far beyond skin. So breathe in slowly, let the silence speak, and step into stories where the real kind of love lives. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit the bell if your heart needs stories that feel like truth. It started slowly, so slowly it almost didn't feel like a beginning at all. Just a laugh across a coffee table, a long walk home after the sun dipped below the skyline, a text sent late, not out of need, but out of the comfort that came with knowing someone would read it and care. There was never a label for what it was, never a discussion about what could be. It was friendship in the purest form, steady, kind, and warm. He listened in a way few people ever did, not just to the words, but to the pauses between them. The silences weren't empty with him, they were full. Sometimes, during those quiet hours, when conversation slowed and the room grew still, his presence said more than anything his voice could. He looked without staring, noticed without intruding, and remembered the small things others always forgot. The kind of man who didn't need to announce he was paying attention. He just did. It never felt like anything more. Or maybe it did, but the feeling was so deeply buried beneath routines and timing and caution that it stayed unnamed. There was safety in pretending it was nothing. That kind of safety is addictive. It gives you the illusion that you're in control, that you're not slipping into something much deeper without meaning to. And yet, with him, every moment felt slightly more tender than it should have been. Every shared glance lingered 1 second too long. Every laugh echoed a little too close to something intimate. When his name lit up the screen, there was a flutter that no one ever talked about. When his shoulder brushed in passing, the air shifted. It was always brushed off with a smile, with a quick change of subject. Neither of them said a word, but both of them knew. Not completely, not with clarity, but in the way the body knows before the heart catches up. There were days when the thought came, fleeting, quiet, then quickly pushed away. What if? But that question always felt too heavy for a friendship that seemed to work so effortlessly. It wasn't worth the risk, or at least that's what logic always said. Because risking something that gave comfort was dangerous, and so the boundary held, invisible but understood, until it didn't. There was one night, the kind of night that sneaks up and stays etched in memory long after the world moves on. The rain started as a whisper, soft against the glass, like the sky was clearing its throat before unleashing all it had held back. It was the kind of night meant for staying in, for shared silences and slow sips of something warm. He came over like he had 100 times before, nothing unusual, nothing planned, just another evening of company that felt more like home than any place ever had. Something was different, though. Maybe it was the way his eyes lingered a little longer. Maybe it was the way the power flickered, and in the dim light, everything that had been hidden became impossible to ignore. The sound of the storm outside was nothing compared to the silence between them, charged, waiting, almost trembling. No words, just the space closing between two people who had been circling each other for too long. When he touched her hand, it wasn't bold, it wasn't rushed, it was cautious, almost hesitant, as if asking a question without speaking. And somehow, in that moment, every wall fell. The years of friendship didn't vanish, they deepened. The foundation they had built was not destroyed by desire, it was revealed. What came next wasn't wild or reckless. It was slow, reverent, like unwrapping something sacred, piece by piece. There was no fumbling, no awkwardness, just a rhythm that felt ancient, like it had always been there beneath the surface. He kissed not like a man claiming something, but like a man honoring something he had loved quietly for a long time. His touch was gentle and knowing, like he had memorized the shape of this connection in 100 silent moments before tonight. It didn't feel like crossing a line. It felt like finally stepping into the truth that had waited so patiently. Every breath, every glance, every shared memory had led here. And now, with nothing left to hide behind, it wasn't terrifying. It was peaceful. It was fire and stillness all at once. The rain kept falling, but inside, time paused. Everything narrowed to the warmth of his skin, the quiet strength in his arms, the soft sounds that needed no translation. It wasn't about passion alone. It was about being known, being seen in a way that left nothing in shadow. It wasn't just physical. It was the unspoken promise that had lived between them for years, finally spoken through every kiss, every touch, every breathless silence. Afterwards, they didn't speak right away. There was no need. The silence wasn't awkward. It was full, heavy with emotion, but also light in a way only truth can be. There was no confusion, no fear, just understanding. And in that quiet, held in his arms while the storm outside softened to a drizzle, something unshakable settled between them. He had always been just a friend, until that night, until everything changed. The night didn't begin like anything special. The sky had been moody all afternoon, clouds thick with a storm that seemed unsure of when to arrive. He messaged, said he was nearby, and asked if he could stop by for a bit, just to talk like always. There was no hesitation. The answer had always been yes with him. No second thoughts, no questions. The door had always been open. That was the kind of bond it was, comfortable, familiar, safe. By the time he arrived, the rain had started, slow and steady, drumming lightly against the windows like a pulse. The lights were dim, not by design, but because the gray outside had swallowed the sun early. It cast the room in a soft, muted kind of calm. He shook off the water from his jacket, his hair slightly damp, eyes tired in the way that told stories without saying a word. He sat down close, the way he always did. There was no need for space between them. There never had been, but something felt different. Not obvious, not loud. Just a quiet shift, like the moment before a tide changes. It wasn't in anything he said. It was in the way his eyes stayed longer, the way his knee brushed and didn't move away, the way his voice dropped lower when asking how the day had been. The storm outside picked up, growing louder, like it wanted to be part of the moment. Thunder rolled in the distance, and the lights flickered once, then steadied. The scent of rain drifted through the open window, a clean, earthy smell that always felt like a reset. Something about it made the air inside heavier, fuller, charged with something neither of them could name. He leaned back and let out a slow breath, one of those quiet exhales that holds more than air. He didn't look at anything in particular, just sat there still, and then, for a long time, neither of them spoke. It wasn't uncomfortable, it never was, but the silence tonight was different, not empty, loaded. Every second felt suspended, like something was about to be said or done or broken open. It happened with no warning. His fingers reached out, not in a sudden way, not demanding, not assuming, just lightly touching the edge of a wrist like he was asking permission without words. It was the smallest thing, just skin to skin. But it undid something. A warmth spread from that point of contact, a ripple that moved inward like a wave, and in that instant, the years of holding back cracked like thin glass under pressure. There was no conversation about it, no declaration, just movement, slow, careful, like both were afraid to disturb whatever delicate thread had pulled them here. His hand slid into hers, the grip gentle but grounding. When their eyes met, there was no confusion. No surprise, only recognition, as if something inside had known all along that this was waiting. The space between them disappeared inch by inch. Every motion was deliberate. Every breath held a little longer than the one before. His face was closer, eyes searching, asking again without speaking. And when his lips touched, it wasn't a kiss for the sake of kissing. It was quiet, reverent, the kind of kiss that says, "I've waited, even if I didn't realize it." Outside, lightning flashed, throwing silver across the room, and for a heartbeat, the world stood still. Everything else, time, sound, history, faded beneath the storm in the sky and the storm building inside. Hands that had once only offered support now wandered with tenderness, tracing the outline of a truth they'd never dared to speak. The clothes didn't fall away quickly. They slipped slowly, like the walls they'd built. Every touch was exploration. Every sigh was a release. There was nothing frantic, nothing rushed, just heat rising like a tide, steady and patient. There were pauses, not of hesitation, but of reverence, as if both needed time to take in what had finally come alive between them. When he held her, it wasn't a claiming. It was a conversation in touch and breath and rhythm. It was the answer to every moment they'd ever sat too close without touching, every glance that lingered too long, every laugh that held a trace of longing. Their bodies moved like they had always known each other. Familiar yet new, soft yet sure, it was deep, slow, full of weight and meaning, not a beginning but an arrival. Afterwards they stayed tangled together, the storm still echoing in the distance, softer now. The quiet wrapped around them again, but this time it was filled with something new, a kind of peace, a kind of knowing. He didn't say anything right away, and neither did she, because nothing needed to be said. Everything had been spoken already, in touches, in sighs, in the space between two heartbeats aligning. That night didn't feel like a choice. It felt like truth finally catching up, like something real had been waiting for permission to breathe. There were no regrets, no questions, just the weight of something beautiful that had taken its time to bloom. Some boundaries don't break with force, they melt quietly in the rain. There are moments when time folds in on itself, when past, present, and everything unspoken collapse into a single breath. That's what it felt like. Not just desire, not just touch, but something deeper breaking through. It didn't come from a place of urgency, it came from a place of knowing, and that made all the difference. It wasn't just the way he looked, it was the way he saw, like every layer, every guarded part, every corner that had been hidden for so long was somehow visible to him. And not in a way that made anything feel exposed, but in a way that made everything feel safe. It wasn't just about being wanted, it was about being understood, understood without asking, understood without having to explain or justify or earn it. When he touched, it was slow, not hesitant, intentional. Fingers moved like they were learning a language for the first time, and every stroke, every press, felt like a sentence whispered to the skin. There was a kind of reverence in it, no rush, no need to prove anything, just presence, real, full, undivided presence. Every inch he touched felt like a thread being unwound from years of silence. It wasn't pleasure alone. It was release, the kind of letting go that doesn't come from physical need, but from something far older and deeper. The kind that comes from being seen fully and held anyway. That night, it felt like something sacred was happening. Not because of where it led, but because of what it meant. Lying there with him, the world didn't just fade away, it ceased to exist. There was no noise in the mind, no wandering thoughts, no worries or timelines. Just warmth, the steady rhythm of breath, the quiet sound of skin against skin, the occasional hum of a sigh that came not from the body, but from the soul finally exhaling after holding its breath for too long. He never asked for more than what was freely given. He never tried to control the pace. He followed, listened, felt, and in doing so, he created a space where every part of her could unfold naturally, where nothing had to be hidden or adjusted or softened, where being vulnerable wasn't a risk, it was a homecoming. The way he held close after every kiss, the way his lips paused on the skin as if to memorize every detail. It wasn't just affection, it was a kind of recognition, a kind of I know you, not in the surface sense, but in the kind of way where even the things never said out loud seem understood. It was strange how much emotion lived in that silence. In those moments between movements, where his forehead rested against hers and breath mingled in the quiet, those were the moments that spoke loudest, that said you're not alone here, that said you matter just as you are. And when he looked into her eyes in those moments, those unguarded, open seconds, it wasn't about heat or hunger, it was about presence. He was there, entirely without distraction, without pretending. Without armor, that kind of gaze doesn't happen often in a life, but when it does, it stays. Every motion, every shift between them felt like a surrender, not to each other, but to something deeper, something that had been waiting beneath the surface for too long. To be wanted was one thing, but to be held as if nothing else in the world existed, that was different. That was the kind of closeness that didn't ask for more, because it already held everything, and it wasn't the kind of night that ended with the act. It continued in the way his arms wrapped tighter, in the way her body curled into his like it had always known its place there, in the way sleep didn't come quickly, because both were too full of the quiet ache of something real finally felt. There was no need to speak. Nothing either of them could have said would have touched the place where they had just been. Words couldn't hold it, only the silence could, and that was enough, because that night wasn't about sex. It was about being seen, being felt, being held in the kind of intimacy that stripped away everything false and left only truth behind. It was the kind of night that didn't just change how the skin remembers touch it, changed how the soul remembers being loved. And in that stillness, as the world outside slept, and the room held only breath and warmth, there was a kind of peace that no words could ever recreate, a kind of knowing that once felt could never be undone. Some love doesn't shout. It doesn't announce itself or demand attention. Some love shows up quietly, touches gently, and stays. The morning after didn't come with confusion. It didn't come with heavy conversations or questions hanging in the air. There was no awkwardness, no trying to make sense of what had happened. It just was, like it had always been meant to be, like that closeness was never new, just remembered. He didn't say much, neither did she. There was no need, their eyes did enough, the quiet glances exchanged over coffee, the way his hand brushed hers when reaching for something on the table. It all carried weight now, not heavy but grounded. Like something had settled into place. Nothing needed to be declared. The labels people often rush to place on things felt useless here. What they had was already known in the space between them. In the way his touch lingered without asking, in the ease of every smile, every pause, the kind of knowing that didn't come from words, but from the kind of intimacy only shared time and truth can create. It didn't become a grand romance played out for the world to see. There weren't constant declarations or dramatic displays. That wasn't their way. Love for them lived in the small things, the quiet things. The way his hand found hers under the table without thought, the way she leaned into him while reading something on her phone, the way they sat together in silence and felt completely full. Even in public, there was something different. He didn't hover or show off, but when they walked side by side, the space between them was naturally closed. People might have called it subtle, but for them it was everything. It was the way their bodies just knew how to move around each other. Like a current running through two people wired to feel the same pull. What once was friendship hadn't disappeared. It had deepened. All the years of trust, of laughter, of knowing each other's rhythms, they had become the roots. And now, with the boundary between them gone, everything bloomed in its own quiet way. He looked at her differently now, not like something new had been discovered, but like something long awaited had finally come home. There was a tenderness in his eyes, especially when she wasn't speaking. He paid attention to the silences even more now, to the way she looked away when something stirred too deeply, to the way her breath caught in moments of quiet joy. He didn't just see her, he noticed her in ways that didn't ask for anything in return. When he held her, it was never rushed, never just out of habit. His hands moved like they knew her, like they respected every part of her. And every time they touched, it wasn't just affection. It was remembrance, a kind of soul memory, like every embrace was a continuation of a conversation they started years ago and were only now brave enough to finish. Their nights were slower, more intimate, not always physical, but always close. Sometimes he would just hold her, his fingers tracing lazy patterns on her back while her head rested against his chest. They didn't need much to feel full. Sometimes it was enough just to fall asleep with the rhythm of his heart beneath her ear. And when they did come together in that physical way, it was never just desire. It was presence. Every movement was felt, every breath shared. It wasn't about intensity, it was about depth, the kind of connection that makes everything else disappear, the kind of closeness where the body stops being a body and becomes an instrument for truth. There was no talk of the future, no pressure to define what would come next. That didn't mean there was doubt. It just meant there was trust, a quiet trust that what they had would unfold as it was meant to, that whatever came, it would be met together. They shared things differently now, not just the surface level stories or daily updates, but the hidden pieces, the parts of themselves they hadn't even known they'd been guarding. The kind of conversations that don't start with words but with a glance, a sigh, a long pause that invites something real to be spoken. Sometimes, when he laughed, she would look at him and feel something inside her ache, not from pain, but from the weight of loving someone so deeply it almost scared her. And yet, in his presence, fear didn't linger. He gave everything space, even the hard things, especially the hard things. This wasn't wild love. This wasn't chaos or obsession or the kind of passion that burns out as fast as it flares. This was steady. This was soul, deep, the kind of love that makes you softer, not weaker, the kind that teaches you that silence can hold more than words, and a single touch can quiet every storm. And even when they were apart, he stayed. In the air, in the memory of his hands, in the echo of his voice, he became part of the rhythm of the days, the stillness of the nights, a presence that lingered without needing to be chased, a warmth that lived in the skin long after he was gone. It didn't matter if no one else understood it. They did, and that was enough. Some love doesn't need to be explained. It just needs to be felt. If this story stirred something deep in you, stay close. Love like this doesn't scream. It whispers, it waits, and when it arrives, it changes everything. So if you believe in slow touches, quiet truths, and the kind of love that finds you when you stop searching, like this video, subscribe for more stories that feel like they were written just for you. And remember, the deepest love is often the one that speaks in silence. Until next time.